Professor, thanks for your time. What was your first reaction to the news of that assassination attempt?
Well, I was working with a British outlet when the attack happened, and the immediate reaction is just sort of being stunned and being very uncertain what exactly had happened. We went through a phase, probably about 30 minutes, where we knew that Donald Trump had been hit by something, but we didn't know whether or not it was actually a bullet. We didn't know, in fact, whether the sounds of popping were firecrackers or gunshots. So you go through that phase of what's happening, and then the phase also, equally important, are there victims in the crowd? And it turns out we've got at least one person killed, two critically wounded. And then you're processing, just this everyday violence that does take place in America. But now, of course, it's a particular type of violence. It's political violence. And you know that it's not just simply going to be a significant event in terms of what has happened, but there are going to be ramifications of it. And I can tell you what struck me immediately and what I think is going to be with me for the months through this election and beyond is that Donald Trump, as he got back up after having hit the ground when his ear was grazed by that bullet, as Secret Service officers were trying to bundle him off the stage, shouted at them, "Wait, wait, wait." And then he put his arm up in the air, that fist, that clenched fist, and he shouted at his supporters, "Fight, fight, fight." Now, the iconic image that your viewers probably will see today, which was taken by Evan Bucci of the Associated Press, is of Trump surrounded by those Secret Service officers with that fist raised in front of an American flag against a blue sky. That's going to be part of the story. That's going to be the story that the Trumpists are going to want to tell. But for me, the equally iconic moment is that message to his supporters to fight, fight, fight. The same message he put out on January 6, 2021, outside the White House before they marched on the Capitol. Because as important as it is to realize that Donald Trump could have been a victim of political violence yesterday, Trump has made his career on the politics of violence. And my concern today, not just as an analyst, but as someone, this is my country. This is where I was born and raised. My worry is that this incident will be used to feed that politics of violence so that Trump can return to the White House that he tried to hold on to, remember, in what effectively was a coup attempt, 3.5 years ago.
So I'll get on to some of those issues you've raised there. I'm wondering, though, you say that iconic image will stay with you. How do you think it will affect the voters in the US seeing this kind of fist-pumping bravado, I guess, at a time of crisis?
Everybody's speculating today on what it immediately means for the election in November, just as we were speculating last week. What does it mean if Joe Biden remains the Democratic candidate? A question which is still with us as well. And I can't tell you how this is going to end up in November, because there are some people who are with Trump come hell or high water. There are some who are deeply opposed to him. And then you've got those important voters who are in between, who haven't made their mind up yet, the independent voters, the so-called swing voters. And so everyone who goes out today and says this will inevitably lead to a Trump victory, or this may not lead to a Trump victory, that all gets put to the side. My concern here is how does this cycle of political violence, not just a cycle, it's almost like wave upon wave of political violence in terms of actions and in terms of rhetoric, affect the American people? How does it affect the American system? Because beyond Trump, we have an issue here that one of the two candidates in this campaign is someone who said on day one, if I return to the White House in January 2025, I will act like a dictator. I will wreak retribution on my enemies. And it is the case that whatever happens in this election, Donald Trump may use this event yesterday as the rationale for carrying out that retribution and for acting, as he put it, not me, as a dictator.
Having said that, Professor, one thing that did happen after this incident was that both political parties, Republicans and Democrats, pulled their campaign ads. So I'm guessing that was something of a kind of middle ground, a calming effect.
I think it's important to note that Democrats and many Republicans, and indeed many leaders around the world, came out with statements that wished Donald Trump well. Importantly, they said that their thoughts were with the victims of this shooting and their families. But there were some Trumpists who immediately took on that invocation of Trump saying, fight, fight, fight. So Donald Trump Jr., within minutes of the shooting and finding out that his father was okay, was immediately saying, this is all the fault of the radical left. J.D. Vance, who's a potential vice presidential choice for Donald Trump, said this is all the fault of the Biden administration. Steve Scalise, who is a victim of gun violence, he was seriously wounded in 2017. He's a U.S. representative. He came out and blamed the Democratic Party and the radical left. So there was immediately this attempt to capitalize on the event by whipping up division, not by trying to make that call for reflection and unity that most Democrats and Republicans had uttered quite rightly, whether it was President Obama, whether it was other Republican leaders in the Senate and the House. Those words will be overshadowed by those Trumpists today who will go for confrontation.
Now, Professor, a lot of there are lots of threats against the president of the USA and any rivals, any politicians, much of them filtered by the system, if you like. And we haven't really seen anything on this scale for quite a while when it comes to targeting of a US leader. So what do you think in this case precipitated this particular incident?
Well, I think it's important to note that even though we have not had an assassination attempt against a US president since 1981, when Ronald Reagan was wounded by John Hinckley, we have seen political violence in recent years against senior US legislators. I mentioned Steve Scalise, the Republican representative who was wounded in 2017. In 2011, the Democratic Senator Gabriela Giffords of Arizona was critically wounded. 6 people were killed by a shooter outside a grocery store in Tucson. In 2020, there was a kidnapping plot, possibly one which could have led to injury or death of the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, there was the political violence of the Capitol attack on January 6, 2021, which is when Trump supporters went through our seat of the US government and were looking for people, legislators, to attack and possibly kill. They shouted, "Hang Mike Pence," Trump's vice president, as they went through the halls. So we have had this political violence with us. We do have this ongoing problem of a proliferation of guns. We do have this polarizing, often corrosive social media, but we do also have the catalyst of certain politicians who feed upon this division rather than dialogue, this confrontation rather than engagement. It is my devout hope that all candidates in this election, national, state, local level, take a step back and call for consideration of the issues, including, by the way, gun control, and avoid hostile rhetoric.
You know, it sounds, Professor,
it's my worry
I was going to say,
some of those candidates will not.
It sounds, Professor, like you're predicting a kind of increase in the level of threat, the risk of more events such as this happening, that perhaps the divisions in the country are driving a more violent society in this respect, and people may, feel emboldened to take action.
It's already happened. Again, if I could refer your viewers to an incident that took place in late 2023. An intruder broke into the house of the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, one of the leading Democrats in Washington, looking to maim or to kill her. He was wielding a hammer. Nancy Pelosi was not there. Her husband, however, Paul Pelosi, was. His skull was fractured. Now, both Pelosi's are fine. I actually saw them at an event in Ireland just a couple of months ago. But there was a politician who immediately after that attack on the Pelosi's did not call out the political violence, did not say this was wrong, did not call for reflection. This was a politician who mocked the Pelosi's and said, "How's Nancy's husband doing? It's a shame she had a wall around her house, but it didn't work." I suspect you know who that politician was. It was Donald Trump. The political violence is already with us. It happened to manifest itself yesterday in an attack on Trump himself for motives that we do not know yet of that 20-year-old shooter,
Just
Thomas Crooks.
yeah, I was going to say, just wrapping this up with a thought. This puts a lot more pressure on the security services. A lot of people are saying that there was a security failure, intelligence failure even, at this particular event. But I wonder where things will, how things will develop going forward when it comes to how security can be implemented, the monitoring of chatter and so on that goes on in order to try to avoid these kind of incidents.
There is clearly a security breach, a serious security breach. Yesterday, that shooter was on reportedly on the rooftop of a building just outside the perimeter that was set up around the rally. So while that perimeter could scan people with magnetometers to make sure that there were no guns inside of it, just outside of it, he was seen bear crawling into position by multiple people who tried to alert security services. Something went badly wrong, and that'll be a part of the investigation by the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Secret Service today. But beyond this, you can put up as much protection as you want to around presidential candidates, senatorial candidates, House candidates, as long as you have the poisonous rhetoric that whips up people, that feeds their anger, that feeds their frustrations, that feeds their resentments. There is always the risk that whatever your security is, one of them will get through. I think there is a responsibility now of everyone in the US, activists, politicians, and maybe especially the US media, to act responsibly now. Stop amplifying the divisive rhetoric. Stop headlining the tweets. Focus on the issues. Focus on the question of responsibility and competence regarding those issues. Make this a true campaign in which you are trying to get people to engage with the problems that affect them on a day-to-day basis, rather than becoming part of the spectacle and the circus that may not entertain, or if it does entertain, may do so violently.
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you very much for your analysis. I hope we have a chance to chat again. Thank you, sir.